Now let's move on to the second dimension, and that being the sea. Now, the sea has surprisingly the sea is just focused on one particular boat, and that is the boat of Mr. Dawson. Mr. Dawson, who's traveling with a kid of his, with his younger child, his younger son, and his son's friend George. So as they are going, George just hops onto the boat with Mr. Dawson and his son, and as Mr. Dawson warns George that you shouldn't hop on as we're going to the war, he says that he wants to serve his nation. And Mr. Dawson says, so be it. And they cut the rope and they set a sail. And as they set a sail, and as they, I'm obviously cutting on a lot of details, but as they get near to the coast, they see that there is a soldier who is striving for his life and who is in the ocean, stranded. And there is none other than Cillian Murphy. And his character has no name, but the credit says the character's name is the Shivering Soldier because he literally is shivering and trying to save himself. So as they save him, Cillian Murphy realizes that this boat is heading towards Dunkirk, and Mr. Dawson denies that we're gonna go back, but Mr. Dawson also says that we're gonna go to the war and save them. And this kind of, uh, you know, Cillian Murphy or the Shivering Soldier, in a tremulous way, says that we cannot go back because if we go there, we would die. And yet, Mr. Dawson ignores him and sets a sail very quickly and brushes him off. And while all of that is happening, Cillian Murphy gets into an argument with Mr. Dawson, his son, and George. And George, who's trying to help Cillian Murphy, ends up getting killed because Cillian Murphy, being a strong soldier, pushes him, and George falls down and ends up bleeding to death. And it is a very, very, very sad scene in the movie when you realize that Mr. Dawson and his son just try to close his eyes and move on from that situation because it shows how war does not wait. It's just like how people say time and tide waits for none. They have to move on. They have to protect other soldiers. And they get to know this when they fetch a bunch of soldiers who are again stranded in the sea, including Alex and Tommy. And they end up realizing that this boy, George, has lost his life, and it is because of Cillian Murphy. And it's just amazing to see that Mr. Dawson and the son doesn't even tell Cillian Murphy that George is dead, just because Cillian Murphy happens to be a hero and is fighting for Britain in the World War II. And this is pretty much the whole scenario from the sea. Now the sea also happens to have a lot of intense situations where there's oil flowing down and there's a blast of a small cruise ship, and there are so many sequences that are shot in a beautiful way. And mind you, all of these three scenarios that I'm telling you are kind of interrelated. So if you watch the movie, they are not parallel, but they kind of get intertwined every now and then, right? Now the final segment being the air. The Air, which has Tom Hardy's character and another co-actor who are flying two different planes, which is a Royal Air Force plane, and they fly a plane named Spitfire. Spitfire happens to be a very, very efficient plane, and it is a fighter plane, which means that it has guns attached to its side engines, which would pretty much attack any plane that comes in its way. And if you watch the movie, you would realize that there are a bunch of German planes, the Luftwaffe, which tries to pin them down in a dogfight sequence, which is probably the most beautiful sequence in the movie because shooting it was probably the most difficult task for Christopher Nolan and a cinematographer. But the way he has done it, my god, I mean, I really cannot explain how beautiful it is, because there are so many scenes which shows that the plane is getting, blasted out of nowhere. And in fact, Tom Hardy's character Farrier, who's the main who has the main role in this whole scenario, he tries to portray so many emotions just through his eyes, because he's covered with mask throughout. And I don't know, it was probably one of the most intense and beautiful things I've witnessed while watching the movie. And they're just sitting down and witnessing Farrier's greatness, that is Tom Hardy's character, trying to nullify the attack of Germans, and he ends up doing it. And he ends up doing it at the cost of his own life, because there is no fuel left in Farrier's plane itself, and he ends up landing in German mainland at the end. And by doing this, he saves thousands of British and French lives who are stuck on the bridge from the mole to the ship, which is supposed to come, and which they're waiting for. And by the time Farrier does this, Kenneth Branagh's character, who is at the bridge with his assistant colonel, he is having a look through the binoculars, and he realizes that there are around 10,000 ships and boats which have arrived at the Dunkirk's coast to protect these soldiers, and they have come at the cost of their own life. And that shows a beautiful that has a very beautiful meaning to it, because it shows how patriotic the Britishers were during the World War II. And while all of this has taken place, you can see the emotions burst out, and how everybody starts going bonkers all over, and they end up crying, and they end up hugging each other, and they end up screaming at the top of their lungs out of happiness that they have been saved. And while all of this is done, the scenarios intertwine at the end, and you can see that Kenneth Branagh, who leads the Navy, stays back for the French. Again, a huge sacrifice that has been made. And Farrier, who has landed in the German mainland, gets arrested, gets imprisoned by the German Nazis. And you could also see that Harry Styles' character Alex, along with Tommy, have reached UK, and they are on a train. And while they are on the train, they get a hero's welcome by a blind man. And Alex, in fact, complains that he did not even look at his face, but Tommy knows that he is a blind man, but he still fails to mention it. And at the end, when they are in the train, Alex encounters a young kid at Woking station in the UK, and he just asks for a paper. And once he grabs it, he's not able to read the headlines, because he just cannot digest what has been written. So he gives it off to Tommy, and somehow Tommy reads it, and he could see that it is the words of Winston Churchill, the then Prime Minister of UK during the World War II, who was probably given the best speech ever in the history of speeches, you could say, because it is known as the darkest hour, the whole Dunkirk scenario. And that speech kind of brings you to tears, and it makes you feel patriotic. Like, I was feeling patriotic even when I was not English. While this speech is being given, the flight that Farrier is in lands in the German mainland, and he gets imprisoned. And it shows an outburst of emotion, and shows a lot of dead soldiers, hats lying on the beach. And it is the time when Winston Churchill mentions that we shall fight no matter what. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but it ends up being one of the best speech till to date. For me, the movie was amazing. There is no doubt about it. But obviously, a lot of people complained that it was not as good as Saving Private Ryan, which is again one of the best one of the best war movies ever been made, which was directed by Steven Spielberg, the great director ever. greatest director ever to be alive. And I feel that maybe Christopher Nolan could have given a bit more screen time to a lot of other characters, but the story didn't exactly call for it. I'm totally happy with it. I would rate this movie around 4.7 to 5 out of 5 because it is probably one of the best movies I've ever watched, and there is, and I don't even have to sugarcoat this because it's such a good movie. And for me, this movie definitely has to be one of the best war movies, like I've already mentioned. And I feel that anyone who's a huge fan of Christopher Nolan, or anyone who's a huge fan of Cillian Murphy or Tom Hardy, you should watch this movie because you know this clearly shows the real nature of war and how actors have been very selfless in portraying the characters, because it really doesn't glorify them, it just glorifies soldiers in general and the sacrifices they have made. And I feel personally that this has to be one of the greatest uh, efforts greatest effort that Christopher Nolan has put. And that's pretty much it, guys. Just tell me how you like the video. Please like and share this video as much as you can, and comment it, view it as much as you can, share it to your friends, family, and tell me how you liked it, and give me some suggestions, and let me know if I'm doing justice to my job. Thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye, and we'll come up with the next video the next time. Thank you.